Just keep an eye on me, and I'll be saying.
Let me just put you the mic.
Okay.
That's
Great. Great. Thank you so much, Alessio. Oh, it's so nice to see so many familiar and also new faces. Thank you for coming to the open mic night of food innovation. I'm so excited to hear all the ideas that are going to be shared today. I'm going to start by taking a bit of a step back and asking what counts as food innovation and looking at how we can innovate traditional diets for future-proof food systems. Because when you hear the words food innovation, or at least for me, what comes to mind is smart fridges, lab-grown meat, AI-generated recipes. And these are fantastic and key for our food transformation. But today I want to make the case that true innovation is not just about new inventions, but also rediscovering and adapting old inventions. So a little bit about me. I've been interested in food and farming since as long as I can remember, but I started working in the space in 2021 with Food Unfolded, which is an EU-funded platform exploring the stories behind our food system. So needless to say, I've explored a lot of stories in our food system throughout the past years, and today I want to try to find a different story about food innovation. Oh, and as Katja mentioned, I'm the champion for the food community here at Norrsken, and we meet every other week on Wednesdays at 11 a.m. So if you are interested to meet other members of the community, please feel free to join. You'll be very welcome, and it's a recurring meeting, so drop in whenever you can. So to get us started, why do we need innovation in our food system? Let's ground this discussion in some realities without saturating you too much with numbers or sad figures. Food systems are responsible for around 1/4 of global greenhouse gas emissions, and 1/3 of all food produced is wasted. Livestock, particularly cows and other ruminants, account for around half of agricultural emissions. And at the same time, by 2050, we will need to feed 10 billion people. So largely increase the land used for agriculture. And given that soils are degrading, we're facing a massive challenge to farm more and more within the limits of what our planet can sustain. This massive challenge means that we can't just tweak the edges of our food system and see what more we can grow. We need fundamental changes in what and how we eat. So how can we feed a future population of 10 billion people a healthy diet within planetary boundaries? Fortunately, we're not starting to answer this question from zero, since this is the exact question that the Eat-Lancet Commission, formed by 37 leading scientists from the biggest research institutions and universities around the world, tried to answer. And their research came to the planetary health diet, or the reference diet. This is a flexible, mostly plant-based way of eating that aligns human health with planetary health. And this diet or model for eating has very specific scientific targets or recommended daily intake ranges that we can see here. If it's not very visible, I really recommend visiting this report and reading it. It's quite an easy and light read and very interesting. And these ranges are for different food groups, and there's emphasized foods, optional foods, and limited foods. So it's quite specific. But still, the challenge is that even if we have a clear model of what an ideal diet looks like, cultural realities matter, and a one-size-fits-all diet won't really work on the ground, and we can't just translate it directly. We need examples. So where can we look for inspiration for planetary health diets on the ground that exist? Well, traditional diets are a good place to start. These are eating patterns that have evolved over centuries and are deeply adapted to local environments and cultures. One of the best known examples of a traditional diet and most widely researched example is the Mediterranean diet. And in fact, the Eat-Lancet report that we just visited connects the reference diet with the Mediterranean diet explicitly and frames it as the only real world, in quotation marks, example of the planetary health diet. And I put real world in quotation marks because traditional food systems, including the Mediterranean diet, are under threat and they're eroding. I'm guessing if you walk around Barcelona or living in Spain, you probably have come across influences of the Mediterranean diet, but it's clear that it's not a pure Mediterranean diet. The globalizations of our food systems, industrialization of them, and urbanization, and even conflict as well, have eroded these traditional diets, and processed food consumption has been rising for decades and decades, and with it also chronic diseases and environmental consequences of our food system. But the thing is to reclaim traditional diets and to bring more traditional eating patterns onto our plates. We can't just put these traditional diets in a museum. We need innovation. We need to adapt these traditions to today's preferences, lifestyles, and realities as well. So I've come across some examples of foods and companies and initiatives that do exactly this. Has anyone ever come across carob? And have you tried it? Oh, great. Well, sí, agarró. Sí, agarró. Yeah. Well, carob trees are native to the Mediterranean, so they thrive in arid landscapes with very little water. And for centuries, people have been harvesting these naturally sweet pods, mostly for animal feed. But today, many startups, like, for example, Forever Foods in Italy, are reimagining carob. They're drying the pods, they're roasting them and grinding them into a powder that is turned into chocolate bars, chocolate spreads, or syrups. So by reviving a food that has been used or kind of overlooked for centuries, like carob, we can create lower impact, locally adaptive, and alternatives to global favorites like chocolate. And this often comes at a lower environmental cost if we do it locally. Another example that I came across with in a cafe in Mallorca is Mediterranean matcha. So olive leaves have been used for millennia across the Mediterranean region in infusions for their medicinal properties. But now some Spanish and Italian startups have taken this traditional ingredient and given it a global twist by powdering the olive leaves and preparing them in a Mediterranean matcha latte type of way. And even though this is a very specific and very small example, it shows quite a powerful idea that instead of simply copying global trends, we can adapt them using what's grown locally or even byproducts of agriculture, which is the case of olive leaves. So reviving traditional diets doesn't have to be about rejecting global influences, but it can be about localizing them ecologically, economically, and culturally. And I've been giving examples about the Mediterranean diet and talking about the Mediterranean diet, but even though it's a strong example of the planetary health diet, exporting it directly elsewhere or around the world would be a bit paradoxical, since what is the strength of the Mediterranean diet is the fact that it celebrates local culture, local recipes, and local ingredients. So recognizing this and also recognizing how disproportionately the Mediterranean diet is researched and glorified compared to other equally healthy and sustainable traditional diets, UNESCO, or the UNESCO Chair on Sustainable Development, introduced the idea of a planetarian diet, which adapts the principles and kind of the pyramid of the Mediterranean diet, plant-rich, local, and seasonal, to different regions of the world, and encourages countries, which here you can see some examples for Canada, canola oil and pecans, in Latin America, avocados, papayas, and acai berries. So it encourages countries to reconnect with their cultural roots and develop healthier, more sustainable diets that are rooted on local foods and traditional agricultural practices. And I'd be very curious if maybe after this session you can think and share what a planetarian diet would look like in your country. But innovation to make traditional diets future-proof isn't just about creating new products like Mediterranean chocolate or olive matcha. It's also about how we organize our food systems in a social way. And across cities and towns today, communities are reviving this spirit of traditional diets, but adapting them to our modern lifestyles. This is done with urban food gardens and allotments, which we have seen across Barcelona and probably most European cities. It can be with alternative food networks, which strengthen the direct link between producers and consumers, resembling traditional markets. Public procurement reforms, like in Copenhagen, public kitchens in hospitals and schools now buy their food exclusively from organic producers. Food policy councils, which gather policymakers and experts to create food strategies and agreed upon food strategies to choose the food landscape that the city wants. And also educational food labs and citizen kitchens, which increase the food literacy and connects us with our food. So these examples, to me, they show that the core values that are embedded in traditional diets, which could be local production, seasonal eating, and community resilience. They don't have to be in the past, but they can be foundations that we can adapt and strengthen and innovate on to create food systems that are ready for the future challenges. So to bring it all together, traditional diets are well-tested models for sustainable and resilient food systems that we need for tomorrow. But they need to evolve in order to remain relevant in a changing world and a changing food landscape. This means that there is a real space for innovation by adapting global products with local ingredients like the Mediterranean matcha, applying new technologies to preserve and process local foods in a sustainable ways, and developing new business models, reconnecting farmers with consumers, or building local food economies. So in conclusion, my message is that future-proofing our food system is not just about preserving tradition, but creatively evolving it. And to be a bit cheesy, the future of food doesn't have to abandon the past, but it can build on it with imagination and adaptation. And that's my message today. Thank you very much.
Super interesting. Thank you so much for being the first one of this session. Does anyone have any questions for Ines? Now it's time for the audience to speak. Anyone? Yes.
It's very particular, but the chocolate from Carob, how does it taste?
Yeah, it tastes quite similar to chocolate, but a bit more earthy.
It's sweeter also. You don't have to add sugar because it's sweet by itself. So it's and it has also like a lot of good properties as cacao, but without topping. So and you have the added you don't have to add sugar. So it's very good.
But the carob pods are also less fattier than the cacao beans, so you have to add fat from other sources to get the consistency of chocolate.
Where should you start with changing cultural attitudes? Like with the individual or like with organizations, companies, like where do you start?
That's a very good point. I think like the social innovation slide showed, it can be bottom up and it can be community created initiatives. But there's also some role that policymakers can create. For example, adapting food-based dietary guidelines to be more celebratory of local and sustainable ingredients. We can increase the food literacy in schools as well, which I think, at least in Spain, there's not that much food literacy taught in schools. We're not really, sometimes we mention the Mediterranean diet in passing, but we're not really taught the best ways to eat in alignment with what's available. So I think there's multiple avenues. It can come from policymakers, but a lot of it can come bottom up as well from community. And on an individual level, of course, there's a lot you can do as well.
Perfect. Anyone else? Yes, Jan?
I think it's interesting what you said. So you used to have a certain type of food, and it's changing, and now you have a global market. And always people have just eaten what was at hand, and mostly cheapest and best food. So a best taste. How do you think we can go back to the origin while not losing the positives of globalism? Like, how do we change that correlation?
Oh,
It's a complicated one.
that's a that's a very good question.
Plant a lettuce in your garden.
Sorry?
Plant a lettuce in your garden, and then you will go back to.
I think so. I think you're right.
Yeah, I think a lot of it is cultural influences. Like we see trends, of course, in eating behavior. For example, 5 years ago, oat milk was rising so fast, and everybody seemed to be choosing alternative plant-based milks. And now we're seeing this decline a little bit, and people accepting animal products more than in a little bit more, especially cow's milk. And I think it comes a lot in cultural waves, but I think there are some things that can be a little bit controlled through social movements or through policy change. If there is kind of a pathway that we want to go towards, we want to eat more local and seasonal foods and lower emission foods, then there are some policies that can be tweaked, or some education that can be given.
I think it's something that in one of the upcoming presentations, the one from Rosanne, I think I don't know where
Yeah.
is it. It's an interesting thing to develop. So part of your question, I think, is going to be answered
You're also aligned.
through the presentation. Yeah, very well. Yeah. Not to spoil her presentation yet, but I think that you will discover more about this there. Any of the experts has anything to add about Jan's question? You can all participate, by the way. It's a very, interactive session, so we're open for the questions, but if any of the other experts has anything to say, anything to add, feel free to step in.
I just want to reiterate what you mentioned about good tasting. You need to make sure, and for Everland, for example, the chocolate, some of the chocolate that they have are really close to what you would find with cacao, not all, but that's the starting point. So to kind of nudge that transition, Rosanne will tell you about that. I think that maintaining good taste or exciting appeal is one of the most important factors.
I think it's also like you said, from policy perspective, a lot needs to happen. But the one positive, which we don't have in a lot of systemic changes, is you can say that we have to go back to what we had. Like that's kind of a conservative story. We remember we used to eat this way, and now we can do. So it's by being you can have a conservative story while being progressive, which I think is a very interesting.
It's a powerful narrative. Yeah.
Paradox. Powerful message as well.
Thank you, Jan. That's thought-provoking.
Correct.
So I have a question. I don't remember how you presented it, but the alternative things that we could do. I think you mentioned something about citizens council and a couple of the other things. What are the challenges to implementing that? Like, for example, one of the things that was up there was urban gardens, to have more of that available. And I know someone whose spouse works for the Generalitat here in Catalonia, and they've done testing on urban gardens, and the amount of toxic fumes within food grown in urban gardens, he basically says don't ever eat food that is literally grown in urban gardens. So that's like one challenge that could be there. But what about the other ones? Have you been able to identify challenges for what could make the other alternative solutions impossible maybe to implement?
That's a very good question. But if it's okay for the urban gardens, would you mind if I pass over the word to you, because you are our expert in the room, I think, in this.
Yes.
So
for the one about the food, the contamination and all that, pollution, there is studies from the university and the research centers that they have done at different levels. So I can pass over to you. I don't know if you send it to everybody later. So I can pass a study done on that, and it hasn't been found any levels that you cannot consume it. Regarding what are the barriers, there are grants from the town hall to build your own community garden if you want. People don't know about it. Most of them, people don't know about it because the government pays like 50% for you to transform your rooftop. but the community needs to vote, so everybody needs to be, on board. But there are many things. I can do another open mic one day.
Yes, please, whenever you
Yeah.
want.
Huertas in the Sky. Maybe if you want to quickly introduce what you
The
do.
thing on pollution, I will send it because it's a question that comes all the time. So it has been done, different studies on this. I'm eating that food, so I'm still here. And it's the same pollution you are breathing anyway, somehow, every day.
Okay, so hopefully this is going to be the inspiration for all the audience to become speakers and come to the other side to see what it's like.
Sure.
But super happy that we have one first candidate. Let's see by the end of this session how many of you want to become speakers. I wish a lot. But we're going to have to jump to the next speaker. So without further ado, I'm going to introduce you to Alessio, who's our next speaker. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much. Muchas gracias.
Alessio will be talking about investment trends in agri-food over the
should
last
give you that.
10 years. So let's find Alessio's presentation. No, that's not the
The
one.
Google slide, the yellow one.
Yeah.
No.
Sorry.
On that tab, the food founder one. No,
that's not
the food founder.
That's Ines.
That's it. Sorry, I thought it was the only other. Then it's on your Slack. No, here, look, here.
I had it ready.
There we go.
There we go.
Fantastic. Woo. Well, good evening, everybody. I'm going to give it a very different type of presentation, which is still all about food innovation and food tech in particular. But I think it piggybacks a little bit more on my personal experience and my journey into this world that started about actually a decade ago. And in pure style, entrepreneurial style that I embodied, I decided to change it last minute this morning. So pardon me if you see any typo or any, missed picture in the presentation. Very briefly, started my career in the food and beverage space about 15 years ago now. I had very long hair at that time, but time passes also for me. I used to work at Diageo, which is a multinational that works in the spirits and wine and beer space. And I have to say I learned a lot there, but I quickly found out that corporate wasn't really my vocational, I guess, aspiration. And so I decided to move to the United States in search for inspiration, and I ended up working for a startup accelerator called Mind the Bridge, where I was basically responsible for business development, and that's really where I actually started dipping my toes into the world of food tech, ironically enough. But I was actually working at a generalist, startup accelerator. And that led me to first establish my first business in the United States, which I then moved to the UK about 2 years-ish later. And this is basically how it kind of all started. First off, in 2009, I basically decided a bit blindly, to be honest with you, to embark on a journey and study at a university in South Korea, which as an Italian, I was basically presented with this very dish and a pair of scissors to basically cut these noodles. And I was like, what an interesting way of, cutting noodles and using, different type of calories that I wasn't really used to. And this is really how I started, I think, broadening my horizons into the world of food. Again, as a very spoiled, 21 years old Italian that I only used to eat, my mom's basically food. I was thrown into, a very different reality where food came in different forms and shapes. And that really led me to eventually continue to effectively broaden my horizons by traveling to different places, working in different countries. And in San Francisco, I really found my, I guess, inspiration to build a company that used to be called Crowdfooding, which in 2014, I set up out of my room in San Francisco to effectively bridge the gap between entrepreneurs and investors, making sure that I was going to help entrepreneurs to have more resources to actually build, their businesses. And was at the very beginning, I think, very much related to the world of food innovation, as in 2013, food tech wasn't really a thing, as in like a fully fledged, sector. That failed miserably, and among many other businesses that I tried to set up, over the years. And I have to say that probably was one of the biggest inspiration to basically build Forward Fooding, which came a year and a half after I decided to shut down crowd fooding as a company, with the view of really helping actually the industry to access some of the technology solutions that entrepreneurs had built at that time. Why did I do that? Because I realized that ultimately funding is a very powerful, way of building and fostering, new ventures. But ultimately, it wasn't really the impact that I wanted to create. As in, it gives you oxygen to get to the next funding round, but ultimately you're going to be always dependent on, funding to continue building your company. While when I kind of flipped the model and created a new company, and really with the view of serving the industry, this is really where we realized that we could have created a way bigger impact at the food system level. But in this whole journey, I basically realized that some other things that I was doing in my spare time, like surfing, which I actually started doing in San Francisco, taught me a lot about how I was actually running the business. And so I know it may sound weird, but effectively, first off, I experienced firsthand what brain freeze is all about. Have you guys ever heard about that? Yeah, have you guys ever experienced that? No. So effectively what happens is that when you do duck diving, so you put your board under the water, especially in the ocean, you basically get this little kick, which you feel that your brain is actually being frozen for a few seconds, because the water deep down is a bit colder than, up there. And so they developed these very smart, hoods, which you can put on your head to effectively mitigate a little bit, the temperature difference. And that helped me to understand how you need to be prepared, really, to embark on a journey of building a business. But then, as I was basically struggling to catch a few waves, very, not really succeeding at it, I was told by a friend of mine that ultimately surfing really boils down to managing well your stamina, right? And focusing and distilling what are the waves that you're going to catch, and really not spend basically time just, paddling effortlessly. Because you're ultimately going to be very tired, and you're not going to have that power to paddle fast when you really want to catch that wave. And so distillation really has been probably the biggest struggle for me, as I have a very creative mind and I tend to kind of disperse, my energies on different things. But really is, I think, the one thing that helped me to then bring the business forward in terms of, understanding that you need to be laser focused to really advance. And ultimately it taught me a lot about patience, right? I know that some surfers say that is better than meditation, And I have to say that when you experience that, you're out there just waiting to catch some waves, you need to be patient, right? You probably spent a lot of time and efforts to get out there, and all you got to do is wanting, to effectively catch a wave, but you need to really be, again, focused and distill the ones that you really are looking to catch. And as you may see from this slide, there is an even bigger learning, which I got out of this, which is basically adaptation, right? You need to be, first and foremost, as an individual, prepared to adapt. And as a consequence of that adaptation, you will be able to be a better, I think, entrepreneur as you try to transfer those capabilities to your business. But let's get into the world of food, right? You all came here for this. So, as industries, in any industry, I think, needs to adapt, right? The problem is that as human beings, the hardest thing that we probably face every day is adapting to new scenarios, right? And so here, I just tried to picture, a traditional dairy business that, will need to adapt over the probably course of the next 50 to 100 years. And I've just fleshed out some of the opportunities that, as far as technology solutions are concerned, that these type of businesses can actually harness as of today, right? The challenge is always that businesses are managed by people, and people are resistant to change. So I'll give you an example, right? Imagine that you are the owner of a dairy business, and all you can start doing from today is to basically build circular and systemic approach to innovations. What does that mean? First, you can try to diversify and mitigate risk by, for instance, investing in alternative ways of producing dairy or meat or whatever. You can use science back to basically solutions to start adding them to the way you run your business, right? I'll give you an example. You can start from your side stream, you can start converting the side stream into single cells proteins or feeds, right? That effectively creates efficiencies in the way you feed your animals or your cows in this case, and you can create also other byproducts off the back of it. And I can go on and on. Circular fertilizer, CO2 from biogas, biogas production from manure, and so forth and so forth. But again, as I mentioned earlier, this doesn't happen overnight, and it takes probably decades for people to really fully wrap their head around how they can start doing this type of circular and systemic approaches to innovation. And so this is really the work that we've dedicated the last 10 years in studying, first and foremost, how this ecosystem of entrepreneurs have evolved over the last decade. And on this very slide, you see that we now map within our food tech data navigator, which is our internal data intelligence platform, about 10,500 companies operating across the full supply chain from ag to basically food production and beyond. And as a cluster of 10,500 companies, they have raised about $250 billion over the course of the last 10 years, right? But ultimately, when we look at the data, we kind of put food tech year zero in 2018, which is really not that far away, as 91% of the funding that has been poured into this system really started from 2018. And when we look, when we take a step back and we kind of compare it to an industry like fintech, you can see that effectively the numbers are, lagging behind, to use an euphemism here, right? Fintech is about 6 times bigger in terms of funding that has gone into, this industry compared to food tech. And we could argue that we're not going to be eating pieces of software that do trading, right? But ultimately, we're probably going to be looking to identify new ways of making more food available to the masses. And so, again, what is the fil rouge from what I've learned as I embarked on this journey? Is that this whole process of evolving ecosystems effectively goes through different waves of innovation, right? And here you see just on a timeline how this ecosystem evolved over the last, 10 years, right? In 2021, we reached the peak of funding with $61 billion invested. In 2019, there was the first company that IPO'd in the alternative protein space called Beyond Meat. And so, again, it came in waves where companies, ultimately what they did is experimenting with existing technologies and just finding new applications of that technology to solve specific problems. I'll give you an example, and we use this term like cross-pollination of technology because ultimately there is nothing new or not so new to be discovered, right? What I think is challenging for entrepreneurs to understand and then to execute on their vision is understanding how that technology can be used for a different application, right? If we take, for instance, in the ag tech world, satellite imagery, right? This technology has been deployed by the army sector for decades, right? If not hundreds of years. When farmers, or better yet, when somebody else explained to farmers that they could use satellite imagery to map their fields, that's where you develop an application of an existing technology to solve a different problem, right? And the list goes on, with precision fermentation is the same thing. Fermentation has been there for forever. How do you basically take that same process and replicate it in a lab to make sure the microorganisms effectively are engineered in a way that ultimately develop the same product from a genetic perspective, and so forth. So really, the challenge, I guess, for you guys is really to figure out, how do you restructure the puzzle to make sure that you create a different application for an existing technology. And this is really how, over the last 10 years, here we just kind of single out the different clusters within the agri-food tech ecosystem. Here you can see clearly that, it came in waves, right? And so the first wave, which we're looking at, 2014 to 2020, was really focused on food delivery and alternative proteins, right? Why? Because we figured that we could get our food delivered to our doorsteps, and investors got really excited about that, and they saw it as the next big thing. So just to give you some numbers, about 60% of what was invested in the last, between 14 and 2021 has gone into alternative protein food delivery, right? That's, we're talking about billions of dollars that were invested in single sort of solutions with a bunch of players operating, within these verticals. And then the second wave, as we call it, is when, people have figured that they could leverage biotechnology to develop, new ways of producing food, and also doing, vertical farming. And this is really where vertical farming picked in 2021, which is still the year where, there was a lot of investment exuberance about the space, which then crashed in line with, global VC funding, really. But just because also the time to exit of most of these businesses are way longer than any other tech business, or again, if you compare like for likes with the likes of fintech. And the third way, which is really the one that we're experiencing in the moment, is a growing interest around climate tech and circular solutions that ultimately, and I'll give you some example in a sec, ultimately effectively can reduce costs and really, I think, help technology do the work that has been designed to do, which is really bringing more efficiency. And in that process, ideally creating more sustainable practices, right? So what we've noticed is that now there is a new sort of movement of entrepreneurs that are looking at disrupting, quote unquote, this space with a very circular approach that start, for instance, with side streams. So how do you go from, reducing the amount of side streams or byproducts that are generated on a production line, right? And you turn that cost into an added value product, right? There are many ways of doing that. You can use mycelium, which is basically the roots of the mushrooms, to upcycle effectively ingredients and turn them into clean plant-based protein, just to name one. And so really, just to wrap up, the time is now, as in there has never been a more exciting time to build a food tech venture. Why? For a number of reasons which I have alluded to earlier, right? There is a big gap in funding still. Valuations now are a lot more reasonable than they used to be. So, you don't have to give away a big chunk of your company to investors that are basically going to invest out of the exuberance, right? And also the market has cleaned up a lot in terms of, the composition of the investor community. There are not that many generalists anymore that also do food tech. There are food techs focused or food tech specialists that really only invest in this space. And then you have a number of other, players, private equity firms, corporate venture capital that effectively are actively looking, to invest in this space. So you need to remember, I think, three main things. First is be prepared. Is $1 billion, the industry employs 1 billion people globally. So we could argue it's probably the biggest industry in the world. And you can only, I guess, picture the level of competition that you have at that level. Also, when it comes to entrepreneurship. Be patient. Commercializations of technology in this industry takes a lot longer than other industries. When you look at exit cycles of tech companies in this space, you probably see a lag of 3 to 4 years easily than in other tech verticals. And most and foremost is get on board early on. Every year we run a ranking called the FoodTech 500, which really gives visibility completely free of charge to entrepreneurs. And we're now at the 6th edition, and I can't wait to get maybe some of you guys to apply for next year. And as I started, with an oceanic view, let me finish with that. I think adapting again is probably the biggest, takeaway that I would highlight, from this presentation. But most and foremost, as you ride the next wave, I think it's really important to have a lot of fun with it and then really enjoy the journey, because ultimately this is where you're going to learn a lot about yourself while you attempt to build a business. Thank you.
Super interesting, Alessio, and I'm sure that you inspired so many questions. Just to be mindful of other speeches and everybody's time. We'll have 2 now, and if by the end we have more time, we'll cover more with Alessio at the end. But we can take 2 questions if anyone is inspired by Alessio's speech.
Please.
Let's go.
So it seemed that the venture capitalists were ill-prepared to really understand how technologies could adapt to the food system, which has lower margin, lower growth, and also a human behavior part, which was not understood at the time. So how do you think the VC world is now adapting to these new waves?
That's a great question. So I don't think there is a silver lining for, or better yet, like a new model that needs to be established for this type of ventures. The one thing, however, that I've experienced over the last decade is that there are certain ventures that are VCable or, could be potentially backed by VCs, and others that just don't make sense in the pure power of law, which is basically what ultimately, dominates this industry, right? You need basically one company to, outperform all the other in your portfolio. That's how you ultimately make money as a VC, right? So first, it comes also from from realizing and acknowledging that, this ecosystem, when it comes to exit and, liquidity event, just run on a very different pathway. Right, and so your expectations, I think, as an investors, are important to be taken into consideration. Also, from general practice in terms of people who manage basically these funds, because you cannot really compare it with other tech verticals, right? So I've seen, for instance, companies operating in the regenerative agriculture space that, of course, intrinsically offer a very different proposition, right, to investors. And this is where I think is actually good news that, this big correction of the market kind of wiped out, all the generalist or, a little bit improvised, call it, investors. Because ultimately, if you don't understand the dynamic of the industry, it's very difficult to also understand the proposition of some of these companies, right? So, unfortunately, there is no playbook, I think, yet, but I think it's going to be written as we experience it, really.
Amazing. Well, thank you so much for bringing
Thank you.
your surfing skills to the open. Next up, spoiler alert, we have Rosanne speaking about from swipe to shift how food platforms can nudge us towards a fun-forward future.
Thank you. Everybody's very hot, I think, or not?
Yeah. Yes. Okay, we can keep this open.
Adaptation.
Adaptation. Okay. Well, thank you. Really nice to be here, and thank you for coming. I'd like to start with a question. So I want you to imagine you had a very long day at work, you were exhausted, and you get home, you jump on a couch, and you're like, oh, I want something to eat, I'm hungry. You grab your phone, you start scrolling. So who of you would go for the most convenient choice instead of the most sustainable one for the dish that you choose?
In a very shameful position.
Well, most people say it. And who of you thinks that the design of the app that you use influences your choice? Well, interesting. Keep this in mind. We will get back to this later. So I would like to start a little bit about my background. I started working as a consultant, organizational change consultant, 6 years ago. That's how I started my career. But after a while, I started thinking, maybe making banks more profitable is not solving the bigger problems of this world. So I decided to quit last year and start an MBA in sustainability and innovation. Oh. And that was amazing for me. So, and already at the start of the MBA, I knew that I wanted to focus on food. And I had good reasons for that, I think. Because if you look at the numbers, then Ines mentioned it already shortly, 26% of our global greenhouse gas emissions come from food, which is huge. And if you look at the land use, we use the size of the land of North and South America combined to feed our livestock for grazing and crops for livestock. So 80% of all agricultural land is used to produce meat and dairy, which is crazy. It's so inefficient. And it leads to biodiversity loss, it leads to ecosystems to collapse. And at the same time, the online food delivery market is growing at lightning speed, with 300% in the coming 10 years. So in 2034, it's expected to be at 637 billion, which is huge. So that is, at one hand, a big threat, and on the other hand, a huge opportunity to drive change. But there's an interesting thing going on, a paradox, I should say. 93% of all EU citizens say climate change is a very serious problem. And 88% of them, they think we should reduce our greenhouse gas emissions to become climate neutral in 2050. But at the same time, I see it all around, I see it in myself, behavior barely changes. So especially when you're hungry, you're scrolling, or you just want to go for the convenient choice. So that's a big contradiction there. And the question is, how can we close the gap between these good intentions and the daily behavior of individuals? So that's what my research is about. I interviewed 9 experts, from behavioral scientists to food innovation experts and UX designers. And what they say is this. Ricardo, he's here, he said, with food, it's emotional. If you want to drive change, you need to make it appealing. And Keisha from Just Eat Takeaway, a huge food delivery platform, said, you can't expect people to behave sustainably if the system around them isn't designed for it. So this is where nudging comes in. Nudging means gently influencing people's decisions without using force or reducing their free will. And that, combined with the right choice architecture, meaning like how you present your information, which colors, with wording, and all these kind of things, that combined can lead to a certain behavioral outcome and also to behavioral change, if you want. So then you might wonder which nudges are most effective. Well, that's what I'm researching as well. And I created a prototype. There are a few nudges that generally work, like changing the default. Now, if you go to a restaurant and you watch the menu, you see like the first 5 dishes are mostly containing meat. But if you change the default from meat default to plant-based default, people are way more likely to go for the plant-based version. Another very nudge that most people know is to avoid the words vegan or vegetarian, because then you, like the meat eater, is not likely to choose that dish if you label it that way. A third very common nudge that's very effective is storytelling. So instead of just talking about ingredients, tell the story. That makes it very appealing. But the biggest takeaway is context matters, like culture, identity, personal goals, all these things matter. So I created 3 persona, 3 different people. The first one is the health seeker. This person wants to eat healthy, he wants to eat high in protein. And we all know there's a big conception about protein. Most people think it has to come from meat, but actually plants are a great source of protein as well. So if you introduce to that person the power lentil salad with high protein and health score A, that might be a very compelling dish for that person. The second one is the hungry convenience eater. That's the person jump on the couch, is looking for comfort, looking for fast delivery. The smoky barbecue wrap might be a perfect option for that person, with plant-based shawarma and with an option to replace the shawarma for meat for extra €2, for instance. And then lastly, we have the conscious flexitarian, which we maybe are, or maybe not. This person knows about the impact of their food on the environment. They want to eat better, but they just need a little encouragement. So then the nudge, like showing the carbon footprint of their dish, might be motivating them to choose better. And also to be able to track your carbon footprint over time, so that it's not just a one-time behavioral change, but it becomes a habit. So I'm curious, who recognizes themselves in one of these persona? Oliver?
First one.
Would you order the power lentil salad?
I like the wording, yeah.
All right.
It resonates. It's good.
Cool.
Definitely.
Smoky barbecue wrap is very appealing as well.
Yeah, you can have that
And the
one.
second one.
Then I go for the veggie grill. But I like to make things a little bit more bold and visionary. So I introduced to you the Duolingo for sustainable eating. Since most people here in this community are internationals, I think we all know Duolingo, or many of us know Duolingo, and how addictive it can be, especially with all these streaks. You want to keep going, you want to compete against others. What if you apply these principles to a digital food environment like this? That you are able to, for instance, track your progress in your carbon footprint and to translate it, to make it more tangible, to how many trees you saved, how much land you saved, how much water, and to keep progressing over time so that it becomes an addiction as well. And then, for instance, the power of community. It's a very powerful nudge. People want to, they don't want to stand out. They want to be part of the group. So, and to put these elements, like competitive elements in it with the score, and to be able to achieve a badge like Planet Saving Hero and maybe earn discounts for your next meal, that might be very effective as well. It makes the experience fun, rewarding, and maybe even cool. So you probably remember the questions that I asked you in the first minute of this presentation. Now I'm wondering, who of you thinks would be sensitive or more likely to order a more sustainable dish if you get these kind of nudges? Okay, Amazing. Now then just make it work and let's accelerate the protein transition with nudges.
Thank you, Rosanne. That was super, super interesting.
Thank you.
All right. Any questions from the audience for Rosanne? Come on, don't be shy.
Yeah.
Did you look into how to argument this case towards, I don't know, for example, the global app and breaking everything in there is like price optimized, they're going to put on top where they earn the most. How could we argument that they put like more sustainable food options at the top? I mean, you can nudge one way or another.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so the question is like, why would they put the more sustainable dishes on top? Yeah, that's a good question, and that's a big like hurdle I think in this transition. Like most digital food apps, delivery apps, they don't have sustainability in their top 3 strategic pillars. So and also like the laws are not really, I don't know, forcing them to focus on it. Most digital food platforms say, yeah, we're only a like middle person because we have the restaurants and they can do their thing, and then you have the platform. It gives the like a opportunity for people to buy the food, but they are not the producers. So I think it's one interesting thing about this is that with nudging and behavioral science, you can maintain profitability while influencing people to make a better choice, because you're not like scaring them away, you're actually engaging them, for instance if you use gamification. So that's a big, like many platforms, they are scared that consumers will go away to the competitors if they are forced to eat more plants. But this way you can, keep that balance and do both. Does that answer your question?
Yeah.
Okay.
Would you rather see existing players implement these ideas, or would you rather see someone set up a competing sustainability forward app that pushes them out?
Interesting question. Yeah, like these big players, they have a great market value already and so many consumers. So it would be amazing if they adopt these principles and apply it to their customers, because it goes much faster than building a platform yourself. But yeah, maybe, I don't know. Can I ask a question back? What do you think?
I guess to me, like, Uber Eats, Just Eat, Glovo, like, they're all interchangeable. I think a lot of people even look at multiple apps and they're all trying to find a way to maintain their base. If one actually is sustainable, isn't just putting it as, like, as you said, not top 3 strategy, but one strategy, and set it somewhere down there because we have to. Could be a differentiator that makes people a little bit more loyal.
Might be preaching to the choir.
Whereas I think, like, if I were to open Glovo and I see my carbon footprint, it's like the airlines. I don't really look at that.
Mm-hmm.
Like I don't really buy it, to be honest. When I look at it on the airlines, I'm taking my place for different reasons.
Mm-hmm.
But I think if that's my ecosystem, I might have a better.
Yeah, that's I agree. And I think it's interesting, like if you really build that community and applying, for instance, gamification, you can really build like something new and something way more engaging, because you said it yourself, like people go from Uber Eats to Glovo to Just Eat Takeaway because they don't really have a like personal bond with it. Well, if you have your community there and you have your game going on and your, everyday streaks, then it might be a good reason to keep going back to the delivery app. Yeah.
Thank you for the presentation. I have one problem. I don't use these delivery apps because the packaging that it creates, the packaging waste that it creates, that is a real problem to the planet, to basically, we know where it all goes. Is this something like, it's all very well talking about this and in terms of but at the end of the day, all these products come from our soils.
Mm-hmm.
So I don't know, how can this be incorporated as well? I know the delivery apps don't see it as their responsibility. However, they've created this.
Mm-hmm.
They created the system of that. Now people are ordering online and I'm personally shocked by the packaging, and that's why I just don't go on these apps.
Yeah, it's good that you do that you're conscious of that. And it's a very good concern you have. I see that as well. And I think, if I just brainstorming solutions, I think a solution can be like if you build that client base that are climate conscious and that are educated via a platform, and you can show the numbers, like how important it is for that big growing customer base to have sustainable packaging or to reduce the packaging or recycle the packaging, then you have a good business case for these restaurants that are aligned to that sustainable delivery app to change and to do better at that. Maybe.
So reduction is the idea. It's basically not having it, and
no, but now there's not much attention to the conscious consumer. Like there's no delivery app that is aligned with these kind of people.
Yeah.
But if you have, then maybe you can convince them to do better. But I don't know. It's a hard thing. Yeah.
Are you missing out if you're aligning and creating an app for the conscious consumer? You could be preaching to the choir, really, because there are already people that have this intention. And when you look at it on a global, like we're in the minority, we're in Norrsken, you feel like you're surrounded by people who do care. And you're right when you point out at the start, even the people who care can find it difficult to make the right choices. So it's not that we don't need the help as well. But I think the biggest impact is if, like with nudge theory, I think it's super interesting because of the fact that you can influence people who don't care to make better decisions, whether it's because you've gamified something. And I also don't think it's limited to the digital. I can see it's a great application digitally, but we have, with food, we're nudged constantly. Supermarkets are like designed down to the T of what is at eye level anywhere where you see food or products being sold. And so I like the idea of trying to utilize that more, but it raises the question of like, how do you convince people to put profit, like sustainability over profit? Because at the moment it's designed down to the T for profit. And I don't know how we go about changing that and moving sustainability up, but yeah.
That's an excellent question. I think it's very hard. That's the hardest group of people. But I think like if you really dive into that person and emphasize with their needs, you can find out what they like and how they like, what kind of dishes they would buy, and then from there try to maybe with micro education, maybe they're very sensitive to gamification or it's a harder group. I personally would start with the climate conscious or the environmental conscious group because they already are motivated to do better, and then maybe if you build that group and it gets bigger and bigger, then like more and more people are convinced to do it as well, but because of social proof kind of.
Google is a good example because in their office buildings, how they've designed catering for the Google employees is very, very tailored down to putting health first, because ultimately they want their workforce to be healthy and hydrated. And I used to work for a water company, and they would put any sugary drinks behind frosted glass and only have water eye level, so that anyone who came in because they were thirsty would automatically, most likely, had to put in extra effort to find a different alternative, and the option was basically water and things like that. So I really like the idea of subconsciously nudging people for better decisions without them even having to engage in that themselves. Like it's just almost directing people towards the right choice, whether it's health or sustainability.
Yeah, that's an excellent idea. That's basically changing the default. It's without letting them know, like
you said,
sneaky. No.
Like vegetarian dishes first on a menu and not calling them that and just making them appealing.
Yeah, exactly. And then maybe you will have a few angry reactions. They're like, hey, where's my meat? But I think most of the people will be okay with it. They're like, hey, interesting. Or they don't even notice it. That could be. Yeah.
Thanks. Any more questions we will leave for the end, because we have 2 more speakers, 2 other experts, amazing experts coming to speak. And next up, thank you so much, Rosanne.
You're welcome.
Next is Oliver Roos.
You did amazing. It was so interesting.
Oh, thank you so much. You did amazing as well.
Thank you so much. Sorry.